Hey there, folks. In this video, we're going to be producing some basic SVG sparkline and small multiple measures inside of Power BI. Well, what does that mean? We're going to actually create some measures that you can throw into a matrix that are going to generate images themselves, right? And so it's going to look like this over here, right? So here we've got a regular old matrix, right? And in this matrix, I've got a measure. In fact, let me show you right here. I'm going to pull this guy open. So here's my matrix, and here I've got this measure called small multiple, and if I click on it, doesn't really matter what's in it, just know that it's just a regular old measure. And this measure on the fly is generating an SVG image, which is a scalable vector graphic image, which is to say a picture, basically, that's going to represent a line chart that is the intersection of like Australia and bike racks, or Canada and caps, you know, for right there, right? So we're generating these small multiples on the fly. So like, for instance, if I were to click on high school right here, it would read, let's see, click on it, there we go. It's going to redraw each one of these images, right? So we can very quickly and easily dynamically change this thing, and we've got this really cool chart that we can use. Like, this is an instance of what you might call small multiples, where you've got like an X and a Y axis, and you want one chart per intersection. You can also use the same thing in a table if you were to just say, hey, let's take this and let's get columns off of there. You could also have this in a table, so you generate, you know, little teeny tiny spark lines for your table. It's a graph that's just small enough to convey the idea, right? It's a very, very powerful trick. This is something that has just recently been possible. In the last update of Power BI, we've had the ability to take a measure and code it as both a web URL and an image URL. So if I come over here to my measure, for a long time I've been able to take a column and say, hey, this column, the data in it, is a URL that points to an image out on the web. Now we can actually go to a, come on, shrink this guy. We can actually go to a measure itself and say, hey, for this particular measure, we can code it as an image URL. And so even though it's actually just text, and if I hover over it, you can see what the text is. If I hover, you can see what the text is. It's going to read that text and say, oh, I know how to render this, and it's going to draw these really cool small multiples for us, okay? I am not the first person to have this idea. If you go out on the web, lots of people have been chatting about this. Chris Webb's got an excellent blog on this, doing a very similar thing using the Google Image Charts API. If you go look at David Eldersfeld's blog, he's got a lot of older posts on basically how to do this, not in a measure, but just in a calculated column. A lot of really cool stuff in there. I highly recommend checking out that blog. Also, Casper de Jong has been blogging about this kind of stuff as well. And so basically, I'm just going to show you how to build one of these guys on the fly. It's not my idea, but you're going to get to watch me implement it kind of in real time. Also, in terms of SVG, I should mention that I learned SVG a long time ago and subsequently forgot it. And so when it came time to do this, basically what I did is I went and I found SVG that was almost what I wanted, which is over here, over on this blog. Let me go all the way up here. This is Robin Rendell's blog. I'm not really a CSS or SVG person, so I don't really check it out very often. But I searched for a line chart in SVG, and this came up. And so I wanted to give him credit. I went ahead and what we're building is based off of, if I can get all the way down here, is based off of this code snippet right here. I modified it just a little bit. And if you were curious what this would do in a regular old website, not in Power BI, is this little snippet of code, this bit right here would say, hey, we're going to create an SVG image, right? And it's going to have these dimensions to it, right? And the image is going to go from here to here. Everything between these two tags is what's going to be in the image. And the image is only going to have one element in it. It's going to be this polyline, which is to say a line with multiple segments, right? And it doesn't have any fill. The stroke or the color of the line is this color right here. The width is, 3. We're going to set it to like, I think 8. And here's all the individual XY points that are in that particular line, okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to build some DAX that writes this, but it's going to dynamically set the width and the height. It's also dynamically going to generate this list of points. That way, every time we, slice and dice, it's going to regenerate this code, and the image is going to look appropriate for it, okay? So let's go ahead and get started. One concept that we're going to need to understand right off the bat is the concept of a month ID. So these small multiples, every point on this small multiple chart is an individual month. And to get that to work effectively, what we're going to need is we're going to need a way to tag each individual month with a number such that that month's number, if you were to add 1 to it, you would get the next month's number. And if you were to subtract 1 from it, you would get the previous month's number. So what it looks like, if I head over here to month ID, if we sort this thing ascending, like right now we've got year, here's the year and here's the month number. Like right now it's August in 2018, so that month number is 24224. And that seems like this weird, big, arbitrary number. All it really means is if I sort this thing in the other direction, right? If I sort this thing all the way from 0 AD, all this is just basically a counter for each month. So for the first month of 0 AD, we get 1. Then for February, we get 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So December of 0 AD is 12. And then January of 1 AD is 13, right? So every month we just get a new number. So when you see this big, ugly number up here, that guy right there, all it is the number of months since 0 AD. And this is a nice way for us to uniquely tag each month and be able to say, all right, here's that month's number, and if I want a month past it, I just add 1, and if I want a month before it, I just subtract 1, right? So like this is 24224. If I wanted to get to the month before, it would be 24223, this minus 1. If I want the month after, it's 24225, just like that. Okay, that's going to be meaningful in a second. Hey, let me show you the formula for that. It's really quite simple. If I come over here to my dim date calendar, I'm going to hit Edit Queries, open this guy up. This is really simple. It's just this expression right here. Right? We added a custom column, and the value or the expression is just take the calendar year, 2018, whatever it is, multiply it by 12. That's how many months there were between 0 AD January and January of this year, and then add the number of months so far this year, and that'll get us that month ID column. Okay. So now that we understand that, let's go look at our base text. So the base text that we're going to use for our SVG image is this bit right here, right? So this is basically a slight variation of what we had on the website. And all it does is it says, here's an SVG image. It's going to have this width, this height. It's going to have these data points on it. It's going to tell me, what the line color is and all that good stuff. We add a little bit here to the front. Dax is going to require this because we're sending this in as text. We need a little thing right up front that says, hey, by the way, this text that I'm going to show you, this isn't regular old text. This is an image. It's an SVG image as opposed to a PNG or a bitmap or something like that. And it's encoded in UTF-8. If you don't know what any of that means, it doesn't matter. You could just copy and paste this right to the front of your SVG code, okay? So the next problem that we're going to have is that this code right here, we're going to copy and paste this into a DAX measure. But notice there's all these quotation marks all over the place. And that's going to be a problem because quotation marks generally start and end a text string. And so these quotation marks are going to fool the DAX engine into thinking that the text string ends here and then restarts here and then ends here again and then restarts here. Well, that's not what we want. We want the quotation marks to be a part of the text string, right? So let me demonstrate the problem a little bit better. So if I come over here and I right click on measures and I create a new measure, and I'm going to call this quotation marks, right? And I create a text string that looks like, Brian's videos are easy to follow, right? Like that. But let's say that I want to add some sarcasm to this. So if I want to add some sarcasm, I could add little quotation marks around this. But now DAX is getting confused. It can't read my sarcasm. It doesn't know that these text strings are meant to be around easy, to actually be a part of the text string. It thinks that they're saying, hey, this is where the text string ends and where the next text string begins. So what we need to do is add double quotations everywhere we have a quotation that's actually a part of the text. This is going to do what's called escaping out that character to say, hey, this quotation mark right here, that's actually a part of the text string, okay? So with that in mind, I'm just going to hit escape. We don't actually need that measure. Let's Alt-Tab back to Notepad. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to take this text right here, which is the HTML code we need, and we're going to replace every one of these double quotation marks with like 2 characters. So quotation marks and then quotation marks again. So let's go to Edit and hit Replace. And so we're going to replace the quotation marks with 2 of the quotation marks. Okay, we just hit Replace All. Okay, and we're done. Now, lastly, when we copy this thing into Power BI, we're going to need to let Power BI know that this whole thing is a text string. So to do that, I'm going to put quotations at the front and the back of it. So now this whole thing will be a text string for us. Okay, Control-C. Head back over to Power BI. I'm going to go to my Build It tab where we're going to build this thing. So let's head over here to New Measures. I'm going to right-click on a new measure. I'm going to say, hey, or on my measure table, I'm going to create a new measure. And let's call this my Sparkies, because we're going to make some Sparkies, spark lines. Okay, so we're going to start by defining a variable, and we're going to call this vBaseText. This is the base text that we're going to work off of. So I'm going to show equals, and I'm going to do Control V to paste that text we had over in Notepad. And here's our base text. Now let's remove some of these spaces. Now, this is actually okay. We could actually send this thing off sort of as is. The problem is this would be a hard-coded chart, right? The width would always be 150. The height would always be 200. That's probably okay. The problem is the data points are going to be these hard-coded data points. So what we want to do is we want to replace this number, the width, this number, the height, and these numbers here, the data points, with the actual width, the actual height, and the actual data points we need. So to make that easy, what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here and I'm going to change this hard-coded number of 150 to hashtag img width. Right? Make sure, do our best to spell it right. And we're going to change this one to hashtag image height. Right? And this whole thing here, we're going to change this to hashtag points. There we go. That'll work just fine. Okay, cool. So now what we could do, I'll show you like what we're going to be working towards. We could take this image and actually replace elements of it with the stuff that we need. So let's go ahead and define our image width and height. So v image, let's do width first because that's the way it is up there. Width, can't spell for anything today. So the image width, let's set that to, I think 320 was the number that I came up with that worked pretty well. And the v image height, let's set that to 200. I found that those two numbers worked pretty well. So if we sort of want to jump ahead a little bit, what we'll do is we're going to create a new variable called var v return. This is what we're generally going to return, like what we're going to be, what the measure is going to be, what it's going to produce when it's all done, right? And what we'll do for this v return now is we're going to do a substitute, or let's do it this way. Let's take our v base text, which is this guy up here, right? This whole thing up here. And what we're going to do is we're going to substitute some text in it. So substitute's going to say, okay, give me a text string, and the text string is going to be this thing right here. And we're going to go substitute. We're going to go substitute anywhere where image width shows up. We're going to sub in the actual number that we have defined as our image width. Okay? And also, we're going to substitute out, from that, when we're done with that, since we've swapped out the width, let's spell these things correctly, it'll work a little bit better, width, we're going to also sub out the, anywhere where we see hashtag image height, we're going to sub that out with the variable that we've defined for image height. Okay, so now that we've got that, nope, sorry, I didn't mean to hit enter right there, I meant to hit shift enter. We're going to return our variable, v-return. Okay, go ahead, hit enter. Now, we're certainly not done. I just want you to see sort of where we're at this point. So let's take my Sparkies, and I'm going to click on this chart right here, and I'm just going to add my Sparkies to it so we can see what the text is that we're generating. Okay, there we go. Okay, so let me grab the edge of this guy, move it over here so we can read it a little bit better. So what we see here is for each one of these cells, we're generating this text right here, right? Which it's got the little header up front, which says that it's an SVG image. It's correctly replaced the width and the height. That's good. That means we typed that in correctly. The only thing we really have to do is swap out that hashtag points with our actual data points, and we'll be done at that point. Now, it's easier said than done, but heck, that's what we're here for, right? So let's head back into our DAX code. Click on that guy right there. So in order to sub out the hashtag points, we're going to need to get that list of points. That's going to be a little bit trickier. We're going to need several things for that. So the first thing we're going to need is a list of the months. So we're going to do v month list. And what I need is I need a table, or I'm going to think of it as a list because it's a one-column table that just got all the months that we're currently looking at. For each one of these cells, how many months are we looking at, right? Basically, like, based on the fact that we've got these two selected right here, it should be 12 for each month. So what we're going to need is a table with those 12. So we're going to do values, dim date, month ID. So for every cell, we're going to get a list of all the month IDs in that cell, right? And then we're going to say, okay, I want to know what the first month is in that list. So I'm going to do not a max, but a min x, right? Go get the smallest month ID number in that list. So let's go v month list. And in that list, I want you to go get the smallest month ID. Notice I started typing in dim date. We don't have all of the categories in the date table because we're only looking at this v month list. And this V month list, this table right here, or list, it's only got one column in it, and that column is dim date month ID. So when I start typing in dim date, I don't get all the dim dates because it's not the dim dates for the regular old date table. It's just this table right here, which I've referenced in the first argument of min x. Okay, so we're going to get the first month in that list. Okay, and as you might expect, we're also going to get the last month in that list. Okay, and this is just going to be a max x. Let's sort of see where I'm going with this. We get the v month list and dim date month ID. Oops. And just like that, let me add some spaces here to make this a little bit easier to read. Okay, cool. So we've got a list of all the months. We've got the first month, and we've also got the last month. And apparently I have a free part replacement. Hopefully that goes away. There we go. I should check into that probably, but not till I'm done recording this video. Okay, so we've got the first month. We've got the last month. We're also going to need the largest number of sales for any given month and the smallest number of sales for any given month. Because that's basically going to define sort of the top and the bottom and the left and the right of the chart. Okay, that's what we're going to need those numbers for. So let's go get V sales min. And for that, we're going to do again, another max X, right? And we're going to say, hey, go to the V month list again. This time, instead of getting the highest or lowest month ID number, what we're going to do is we're going to, for every single month, we're going to calculate the total sales, and we're going to get the highest of those numbers, right? This is going to it's going to say, hey, go get all the list, go get all the months. For each month, calculate the total sales and bring back the highest number, which should be the top of the chart. Now, one thing I'm going to do here, because some months might not have any sales, I'm going to add 0 to this measure, because if you do it sort of like normal, you just have the measure by itself. If there's a month that doesn't have any sales, it'll return blank, and it won't actually consider that month's sales in the max or the min. So we're going to add 0 to say, hey, if there's a month with no sales, that might be the highest selling month, or it might be the lowest selling month. We want to consider that, okay? So me being lazy, I'm just going to go ahead and scoop up this code right here, Control-C, and I'm going to Control-V to paste it. And interestingly, notice it doesn't give you an error if you have two variables of the same name. But I'm not going to keep it like that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to change this from V sales max, and instead of being a max X, I'm going to make this a min X. Just like that. Okay, and same deal. I'm going to go through all of the months in our list, and I'm going to, for each one, I'm going to generate the total sales and add 0 to it in case there were no sales for that month, and go find the smallest number. Oh, did I get these backwards? I did. This should be V max. This should be min, right? So for the max, we're going to go through each month and get the highest sales. For the min, we're going to go through each month and get the lowest sales. Okay, sorry for any confusion there. Okay, so now that we've got those things, what we need to do is generate a list of data points. So we're going to var to create a new variable. We're going to call this v points, okay? And whenever you're generating sort of a list from a table, which is what we're about to do, you should consider, hey, am I going to be using concatenate x? And indeed, we are. That's sort of what concatenate x is good for. So let's go find concatenate x. What concatenate x is going to do is we're going to say, hey, go over a table, row by row, go over the month list table, and for each row in the table, I want you to generate a text string. And then when you're done generating all those text strings, I want you to stitch them together with a delimiter, or a thing that goes between those two text strings, okay? So let's start this way. What I'm going to do is I'm going to hit enter right there. We're going to start defining what the expression is, but rather than doing the whole thing at once, I'm going to start with a simple expression that's wrong, but it'll help you understand how it's working, right? So since we're here defining our expression for each row's text string, I can go ahead and define some more variables. So I'm going to do var vc, because we're in concatenate x, that's what the C is for. I don't know if that's a best practice, that's just sort of how I'm doing it. We're going to call this point x, right? This is the x coordinate for this particular point. Now, I'm going to have to write this whole thing out in a second, but for now, I'm just going to type out, I don't know, 50, right? And let's create another variable called vc point y, and that's going to be defined as 100. Now, obviously, it's not going to be 50 and 100 for every single point in the final chart. This is just going to help us understand how the whole thing's working. So, for every single row in v month list, I want you to go define a variable, call it var point x, put 50 into it, define a variable called vc point y, put 100 into it, and then go return vc point x, ampersand, comma, right? So we're going to say, hey, go get vc point x, vc point y, and get those two text strings and stick in between them this little comma right here. So it should be 50, 100 for every single row, okay? And once you've done that for each row, take all of those little text strings and stitch them together, well, I should say, comma, stitch them together with a delimiter. So this is what goes between the pairs of data points. And for that, I'm going to do quotation mark, comma, space, space, close quotation mark. I'm going to add 2 spaces to make it a little easier to spot. And that's it. So I'm going to add another comma. And lastly, it wants to know, hey, how should I sort these things? I'm going to just do it by the month. So I want the first month to come first. You could do it a different way if you wanted to. It wouldn't really make sense here, but you could. Concatenate will let you do that. So we're going to say, hey, what order do we want to put these in? Well, we want to put these in the order of the month ID. So the first month through the last month. That's the order it should come back in. Let me hit backspace a couple times. Close my parentheses there. And now I've got V points defined. So what I'm going to do at this point, get it, point. I'm going to swap out. So instead of returning V return, I'm going to swap out V points, just so you can see what we're generating right now, right? So I'm going to go ahead, hit enter. And now for every single cell, remember, we're only looking at this one variable, this V points variable. For every month, we generate this this pair of 50, 100, 50, 100, 50, 100, right? 50, 100. So 50, comma, 100. And between them, we have this comma space, which is that comma space right there, right? So these are XY pairs, those are XY pairs, those are XY pairs, just like that. So what we need to do at this point, in fact, let's do this. Let's take our return right now. Let's remind ourselves what that looks like, V return. And if I hit enter, right, we get that right there, which has got everything that we need except points hasn't been subbed out yet. So let's sub out points with our fake list right here, just so we can see what that looks like. I'm going to add another substitute around this whole thing. I'm going to say, hey, you've swapped out the image width, you've swapped out the image height. Let's go swap out the points. So go look for the text string points, right? And when you see it, I want you to put instead that list of points, or that text string of points that we generated just a second ago. So when I hit enter, because we're returning V return, here where it says points, it should actually be a bunch of 50, 100, 50, 100, 50, 100s. And sure enough, there you go, okay? So if we were to get these 50s and 100s to be the actual numbers, we'd be done. So let's go ahead and get started with that. So right now, VC point X is set to 50. That's not correct at all. What we want to know is how many points from the left side of the image is this particular dot, okay? So 1, 2, 3, 4, add ourselves a little bit of indentation there to make it easier to read. We're going to start with this int right here, and int's just going to round the number that we get, because when we actually calculate which pixel it should be, how many pixels from the left, there'll be a decimal point and a bunch of numbers after that, and we just want to round it to the nearest number. So this is going to be an easy way to do that. If you want to, you could use the round functions, maybe a little teeny bit more precise, 1 pixel more precise, potentially. I'm going to do this because it's easy to read. So what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to start by getting the percentage across the x-axis this thing needs to be. So from left to right, is it 0%? Is it on the left side of the screen or left side of the chart? Is it 50%? It's halfway across the chart. Is it 100%? It's all the way to the right of the chart. That's what we need to figure out. So to get that, we're going to do divide. And we're going to divide the this row's month ID minus the smallest month ID, month first, right? So this is how many months past the first month are we? And we're going to divide that by the number of, or the range from the highest to the lowest month. So we're going to get V month last and subtract V month first, right? So, this is going to say, hey, how many months are there from left to right? Oh, there's, I don't know, 12 or something like that. Well, we want to know how many months across is this? Is it 6? Is it halfway? Is it, 0? Is it like the first one? Is it the last month? Is it 12? Which one is it? And that's going to generate a percentage for us, right? So how far from the left to the right are we based on our percentage? And once we know what the percentage is, we can multiply that. By the number of pixels in the chart, which is just V image width, and that'll actually determine what pixel it needs to be, right? So if it's 50% of the way across, that's going to correspond to, 0.5, and if the width of the image is 320, well then that's going to return the pixel 160, which is exactly how many pixels it should be from the left to the right. Perfect. That's exactly what we need. Okay. So now we've got the X part done. Let's go ahead and do the Y part. Hopefully this tooltip will get out of our way. Right? Okay. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Same kind of deal. Start with an integer because we're going to round this thing. We don't want a bunch of, numbers out to the decimal point. And what we'll do here is, again, we're going to divide. We're going to divide. This time we're going to go get, for each row, we're going to get that row's total sales, right? I'm sorry, not comma. We're going to subtract the sales, the minimum sales, right? To say how many sales, how many dollars are we above the minimum for all data points? Like that's how far we are up on the x-axis, right? Just in terms of dollars. But we need to convert it first to percentages. So to convert it to percentages, we have to divide it by the range. And so the range is, let's see, the sale, we're going to get the highest selling month, and we're going to subtract the sales from the lowest selling month, right? And that's going to say, hey, how far from the bottom should we be percentage-wise, right? So if this is the worst selling month, it'll be 0%. If it's the highest selling month, it'll be 100%. If it's, down here, it'll be like 50% or something like that. But again, percentage is good. We need the number of pixels. But if we know the percentage up that it should be, and we know how many pixels there are from the top to the bottom, we can multiply one by the other to figure out how many pixels up this thing should be. Image height. Okay? Just like that. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, here's where SVG gets a little interesting / maybe annoying, depending on your perspective. This is going to work, but it's going to be the opposite of what we need. The reason being is that when we think about charts, if we think 100% of the height, we start from the bottom and draw upward. So if we were to say 75%, that the sales is 75% of the highest selling month, we would think that would fall on this, right here or something like that. The problem is because we start from the bottom. SVG doesn't start from the bottom, it starts from the top, right? So when we say 75%, it's actually 75% from the top. And if that's like, 80 pixels, it's 80 pixels from the top, not the bottom, okay? So what we've got is this is the number that should be from the bottom, and we need to know the number that it should be from the top. So all we have to do is say, hey, how many pixels are there from the top to the bottom, and subtract this from it, and then we'll know how many pixels it is from the top, which is exactly what we need. So that's pretty easy. Come over here, Shift Enter, 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm gonna get what am I gonna get? I'm gonna get the image height, and now I'm just going to come down here and subtract this from it, right? Just like that. Okay, so now if I hit enter, let's see how good of a job I did. Boom. Now I've got this right here, and for what was those zeros and 50s, I've actually got the coordinates starting from the top left for each one of those data points, okay? So at this point, I should be able to come down here and say, hey, instead of making this text, which is sort of its default, I'm going to click on that measure, head over here to modeling, and categorize this as an image URL. And if we're lucky, hey, it worked. Cool. All right. So a couple other small things that I'm going to sort of hint you in on. Right now, if you'll notice, this is working pretty good, but there's these sort of rows here where there were no sales to begin with, and so the chart is flat. And that's okay, but you might say to yourself, well, if there were no sales to begin with, maybe I just don't want to see this chart at all. So to get that behavior to work, I'm going to come here where it says return. I'm going to do if there were any sales at all, if total sales returned anything but blank, which is to say they sold something. If they sold something, go ahead and show vReturn, which is to say the chart. If they didn't, show blank instead, return nothing, okay? And so I'm going to go ahead, hit enter, and get rid of all of those guys. Ah, that's very nice. And again, just to show off that it's working, right? Now, some of these aren't that interesting. Let's go ahead and add like a month here or something like that. Okay, yeah, that works pretty well. Okay, let me click on, yeah, turn that guy off. So this is pretty good. There's one thing I want to improve about this. If I come over here to my Sparkies, it's the measure we just created. One issue that I potentially would see with this is in terms of the y-axis, it goes from all the way to the bottom to all the way to the top, and that might be fine for a lot of folks. I think sometimes that can seem a little claustrophobic, and if the line is all the way near the bottom, it can be a little hard to read. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a little padding to the top and the bottom. You don't have to do this, obviously. This actually is looking pretty good, but you can. And so to do that, I'm going to come in here to my points variable. And here for VC point Y, in this little bit here where I'm multiplying it by the image height, I'm also going to multiply it. I'm going to multiply it by 0.90 or 90%, which is to say, take the shape and shrink it by 10%. So this should shrink down just a little bit when I hit enter. So I go ahead and hit enter, and sure enough, it shrinks just a teeny bit, right? So in fact, maybe I can make this a little bit bigger. Let's turn this to 80%. So you can see it a little bit better. Yeah, okay. Now you can see the effect. That's too strong. I just wanted you to be able to see it, make it nice and apparent. We're going to shrink it to 90%. And that's good, but it shrunk it sort of from the bottom down. So all of the shrinking happened here at the top. What we want to do is recenter it. And so to recenter it, it's pretty easy. We're going to say, hey, go ahead and add, sort of lift this thing up by the image height times 0.05. So why 0.05? Well, so we shrunk this thing down by 10%. So it's 90% of its original size, which means there's 10% of the chart that we've shrunk it down by. If we add 5% to the bottom, there'll be 5% on the bottom and then 5% on the top. So it's half of the missing 10% here, okay? So that should work pretty well. So I'm going to go ahead, hit enter. And there we go. We got a nice line. Now, there's lots of things you could do here if you want to play around with some of this stuff. Like if you come in here, you could see like the background color is this FB hex value that I defined. If you want to do something a little bit darker, like let's say E2, 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 you could go ahead, hit enter, and that works just fine. If you want to change the width from like 8 to 12, you could do lots of stuff like that. And you could obviously use variables to kind of parameterize these things. It's all about, how, I don't know, dynamic you want to make it. But in general, like that's it. That's how you create one of these sparklines. I think they're very flexible. They're very cool. I will say one little bug that I have found is if you add subtotals, right now I think it's just a bug because this is a new release. If you add subtotals, like let's add row subtotals right here, the subtotal itself, it can't render it. I don't know why, it just can't. So for now, you actually have to turn off subtotals, which is a bit of a bummer, but generally speaking, you don't really need it that much. And you can get this really cool sparkline effect, right? And so now if I want to create, like right now, this is sort of a sparkline-y kind of thing. If I want to turn into small multiples, let's turn this measure off. All I have to do is find something to drag onto the columns part of the matrix. So let's head over here. And I don't know, where is it? Dim customer, let's go find country code, country region code. I think that's it. Let's see if that's it. Hey, there we go. And now I've got my cool small multiples, right? I'd probably tone down that background color, make it a little less aggressive, but I think you get the idea, right? So we can slice and dice just like that. Okay, there's all of it. Okay, well, I know that was a lot to take in. Please feel free to rewatch this video. It might take a couple passes, but it's a really powerful trick, and I think once you get it, you can see all the different things you could do with it. Okay, well, I really hope that video was helpful, and I will see you next video.